to defeat. It just goes on, and I think that war on terrorism may be the same thing, the offing.
All right, Garrett Cutley in New York, thanks very much. Is that right? Is that your feeling too, General Clark, that this will just go on
I'm very
and on
concerned
and on?
about this, and that's
Must
why
we always watch out for terrorism? I mean, we had to before, but even more now till the end of time?
Well, I think there will always be those who somehow react against the United States or other leading powers who are driving the pace of modernization and economic development and technological progress in the world. Whether they will always resort to force and violence to murder our citizens, that's another matter. And I think that it very much depends on how we handle this campaign now. Certainly these people who did this are embittered. They're very ideological and dogmatic, and we're not going to talk them out of what they're doing. So we have to isolate them, cut them off, bring them to justice, or otherwise handle this situation. How we do this will determine whether others follow them. And in that sense, it's a little bit different than the war on drugs because the motivation is different and the consequences are different. This is so shocking. This is so horrifying what's happened in Washington and New York City that we clearly have the moral high ground. We have the ability to mobilize most of the leadership in the entire world to come to our aid to deal with these networks. It's a very tough dilemma the president's in because Americans want rapid action, but it has to be effective action in view of our long-term objectives, not just a spasm of response to satisfy an irate American public. Goodness knows we're all angry about this, but we've got to strike smart.
Effective, and I was just going to say the word you keep using is smart, and the president said
Yep.
this would be a monumental battle between good and evil, but that good would win out, and the president is under an enormous amount of pressure.
Yes.
Major Garrett at the White House.
Donna, let me tackle this from a couple of different angles. Picking up on Garrett's first point about the pressure he believes the president is under. Clearly the White House feels it. Senior advisors to the president feel it. But I commend to all of us the president's first statement from the Oval Office on that Tuesday night after he returned to the Oval Office from traveling around the country because of the very real security danger afflicting and focused on Air Force One. There were several drafts of that speech, I have been told, many of them much tougher than the speech the president delivered. Much, much tougher, I have been told, by some senior White House advisors. The president toned those remarks down. He did not want to strike an immediate tone of vengeance or bloodlust from the Oval Office. What he wanted to try to do was send as calm and as reassuring signal as he could to the nation and to the rest of the world about the temperate and balanced approach he was going to take. Any president under those circumstances would have felt the very real compulsion to talk in words of vengeance, to sort of strike at that very real sense of outrage and horror all Americans felt. The president decided that he would do it a bit differently, and there was some internal second-guessing the next day within the White House. Was he strong enough? Did he strike as strong a note as the American public needed, they thought, some thought, the public needed to hear? The president had no second-guessing about that statement, and he has gradually stepped up the rhetoric in consistent methodology, we are told, as the military apparatus, as the intelligence service has gathered more information, and the president has become more internally confident about his ability to deal with this situation in a timely and effective manner. So I would only refer the nation to the president's own remarks, and you have seen him move in a direction steadily. But he resisted the temptation on that very first evening to be harsh and bellicose, even though some of those very type words were laid before him as options. He rejected them. And on Garrett's other point about the drug war, I can tell you this. The White House sees no analogy whatsoever, and in fact has spoken about the drug war in different terms. This president has often, even in the company of leaders from Peruvian countries who suffer much more gravely the real tragedies of the drug war than many Americans do, about the fault that lies in America on the demand side of this equation. So he's even spoken differently about the drug war. But this is not analogous in any way at this Bush White House. The victims of the terrorism attacks on Tuesday were innocent American civilians who never once brought anything approaching the harm that fell upon them in their direction, as the president has often argued Americans do who take drugs. So they don't see any analogy whatsoever with the drug war or its protracted and in some cases endless struggle. They do believe and are becoming ever more confident that they can find those responsible for these acts of terrorism and bring about, as the president has said, justice.
Major
Donna?
Garrett, Major, thanks very much. Let's go to Jeremiah in Georgia on the phone with us right now. Jeremiah?
I was calling towards the question of if we should take retaliation.
Jeremiah, could you start over for a minute? I missed the first part of what you were saying. Could you start over, please?
Yeah, I was calling in for the question, should we retaliate or not? I believe we should, because they were able to penetrate our security at the airport, and we were supposed to have a strong security then. Who says they're not going to be stupid enough or gutsy enough to try it again in a different form? You know, who says they're not going to put a bomb there in a car or something wild and crazy? Where do they come with these ideas anyway, and what have we done wrong to them for them to kill thousands of our innocent citizens for no reason?
General Clark, there's been some talk about, wondering who the enemy is, and I saw some wire reports and some of our reporting talking about that there were worries now still that perhaps this isn't all over and done with, that they were worried about further terrorist attacks and maybe in different forms. And we've had the first arrest, I think you've known with the updates on news here that we've been telling you about, one of the arrests of one of the people who was taken into custody, I believe, at one of the two New York airports on Thursday evening. I think it was JFK or LaGuardia. Those were, they took in like 10 or 12 people, and now they've had the first arrest. So what do you do to watch out, like Jeremiah says, for what could be coming in the next wave?
Well, you have to go back and go through a security analysis of all of your vulnerable systems. The airports, certainly, but also other things, our utilities, our public services. There's much more horrifying scenarios that could be constructed than what happened. And we need to make sure those scenarios never happen. So that's the first battle we're waging right now in the United States. Now, we don't know if we're winning or not, but we've got to do our best.
Well, I saw, too, the FBI was saying, although this person did not pass the lie detector test, so they're saying that perhaps this isn't accurate as they thought before, but there was a warning that maybe Boston, Atlanta, Richmond, Virginia might have also been targets during Tuesday's attacks. So now they wonder, because he didn't pass the lie detector test where they got some of this information, but they were talking about people are worried who work in skyscrapers. You know, they're nervous about that, and that gun sales are up. Particularly, they're edgy in Boston, where the first two planes that hit the World Trade Center towers hit.
Well, I think it would be really surprising if he only had 4 teams, and 3 of the 4 teams took over and were successful, in this case with these aircraft. So we don't know how many teams there really were and how many people are fleeing across the country trying to get away or waiting to try it in a different manner.
I'm sorry, Rick, could you tell me who the next caller is? Once again, Laura, Arizona. Hi, Arizona. Go right ahead.
Yeah, my point is, first of all, I really hope President Bush understands that we will be patient enough for them to do the smart thing. And I don't think the question is if we should retaliate. I think it's going to be how we're going to retaliate, because I believe as a world we're trying to unite, to come together. This is the extortionist, and we need... Any terrorist is just an extortionist. We need to, number one, figure out how to take away their power, how to really get to them as a world. We're all not going to put up with this. If some country wants to declare war, they need to declare war on us, like we're saying. Who are we going to retaliate against? An individual? And so I think they're on the right track. They're going to do the right thing, and I think most Americans have complete confidence in our leaders, and they're all seeming that they're going to get it right this time.
Laura
and
from Arizona.
I'm confident.
Thank you very much for your call. Did you finish your thought? Were you able to finish your thought there?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
But I think everyone so far, I think that our country's finally going to pull together, like the general said, and lead the world in showing how to get rid of terrorists once and for all, because you let extortionists in, they're going to keep doing it.
General Clark, what about that? You were involved, as we said before, 5 years. You trained leaders and soldiers, and many of them went to Desert Storm. How is the patience factor? Laura mentioned that, the United States, folks in the United States, she feels a lot of them would be patient. What do you think?
Well,
is there
patience
patience?
factor in the armed forces is great. the
Right. How
patience
about the
factor in the
general
American public? Well, I think we're going to go through a certain set of stages after this campaign. I mean, first we're angry right now, and we're grieving right now. But I think as more of the facts come out, I think people will rally behind the president. He's going to set the pace of this based on the information that's given to him, what our capabilities are, and what makes sense, and I think the American people will support it. I think we're a mature population, and I think we certainly can hold our horses until we do the right thing in this.
General Clark, we're glad to have you here with us in Atlanta, our military consultant and former NATO commander. Thank you very much. As we carry on here, news that we've been bringing you, now they have 4 of the black boxes that have been found. One from the plane that hit the Pentagon and one from the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. Let's get the latest news for you with Jim Clancy and Colleen McEdwards. Jim and Colleen?
All right, Donna, interesting discussion. We're going to now give you a bit of a profile of the man that's the leading suspect and also take you to a country that is certainly going to be a key player in all of this.
That's right. We begin with Osama bin Laden. The man that some Bush administration officials are calling the prime suspect has long been at the top of the U.S. list of major sponsors of terrorism. Andrea Koppel looks at what the U.S. response might be if bin Laden were to be the target.
If, as the U.S. suggests, Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind Tuesday's attacks, going after him and shutting down his al-Qaeda terrorist network will require more than just a military assault on Afghanistan. That's because over the years, al-Qaeda has become an international network with cells rooted in almost every region of the world. That's why Secretary of State Colin Powell has put the world on notice. The United States needs help.
I am not threatening so much as I am saying this has become a new benchmark, a new way of measuring the relationship and what we can do together in the future.
Since Tuesday, Powell has had the world on speed dial, in particular reaching out to countries where the U.S. says Islamic militant groups have links to bin Laden's network.
Once these people have been trained in Afghanistan, we know that they've gone to Africa, we know that they've gone to Asia, we know that they've gone back to the Middle East, and it's clear now that they've also come to the United States.
People like Ahmed Rassam, the man charged with attempting to bomb the United States over the millennium. He's a member of Algeria's armed Islamic group, but was trained by bin Laden. So were members of Pakistan's Harak-ul-Mujahideen group, which hijacked an Indian jetliner to Afghanistan in December 1999. On Friday, Pakistan's president informed the U.S. his country is prepared to take specific steps to help the U.S. wage its campaign against bin Laden. And in the Arab world, Powell has asked countries like Saudi Arabia to cut off the flow of money and resources to bin Laden. For Secretary Powell, who led Allied troops to victory in the Gulf War, this war against terrorists will be fought on an entirely different battlefield.
And so you have to design a campaign plan that goes after that kind of enemy. And it isn't always blunt force military, although that is certainly an option.
But diplomatic sources say whatever option the U.S. chooses to take, it will need the support of Islamic countries. Such support would send a strong message to bin Laden and his Islamic extremist supporters around the world. They have nowhere to hide. Andrea Koppel, CNN, at the State Department.
Now, as we have reported, the United States has presented Pakistan with ways that it could help in the aftermath of Tuesday's attacks. Friday, Pakistan's leadership pledged to, quote, fully cooperate. Officials in Washington, though, want to know how the broader military leadership there thinks. CNN's Tom Mantir is in Pakistan. He joins us now with more on that. Tom?
Jim, in the next 3/4 of an hour, we should know better what that level of cooperation between Pakistan and the United States will be. There is a National Security Council and a cabinet meeting that will be going on to discuss a meeting that occurred yesterday with all of the top military commanders, a lengthy meeting. At the end of the meeting, according to the Ministry of Information, they were unanimous in condemning terrorism and pledging the support to the United States. Now, the United States has put a list of specific demands to the Pakistani government, closing its door with with Afghanistan, stopping fuel supplies to the Taliban, and also, if required, allowing U.S. planes to fly over Pakistani airspace. In addition to that, possibly even more important is to provide human intelligence to the United States about Osama bin Laden. In 1998, when cruise missiles rained down on Afghanistan, they were largely ineffective because they didn't have that type of cooperation. Pakistan has pledged full cooperation with the United States. What they're waiting for, I'm sure, in the State Department right now in the Pentagon is what that level of cooperation is, what will be allowed and what will not be allowed. But we should know later this afternoon, the Pakistani government has said they will announce publicly what they are going to be doing. They will bring basically the entire country into its confidence, telling them up front what the level of cooperation will be with the United States. But the Pakistani president has a very difficult line to walk, helping the United States into counterterrorism and keeping domestic situation at home calm. So we should know in the next couple of hours what those steps that the Pakistani government is going to afford to the United States if and when a military strike is involved, what will be allowed to happen here, and how the Pakistani government will assist the United States. Jim?
Briefly, Tom, if the United States, if President Bush wants to build a coalition, is there any country more important than Pakistan?
I think there's probably no country as important and as critical to any operation as Pakistan, because they indeed do have the best human intelligence on the ground because of the close ties with the Taliban. I think that Saudi Arabia could also play a major role in the Islamic world because Saudi Arabia has experience in dealing with the United States. If the Saudis are seen to be on board, and supposedly a Saudi diplomat is coming to Pakistan today or tomorrow to meet with the government officials to discuss the level of cooperation. So I think Pakistan is probably number one, and Saudi Arabia is probably number two in the list of importance to the United States in this coalition effort.
All right, Tom Mintier, thank you for that update.
And of course, we will go back to Tom Mintier if there are any developments out of Pakistan on that issue of support. But for now, we want to toss it back to Donna. Donna?
All right, Jim and Colleen, thanks very much. As we carry on here, the world, much of the world, shares America's grief, and it also shares its concern that terrorists can strike anytime, anywhere. Have the terror attacks shaken your sense of security? Well, taking your questions and comments is M.J. Gohil of the Asia Pacific Foundation. It's a London-based policy assessment group that focuses on security and terrorism issues. And you can start calling us back if you'd like right now. The number in the United States is 1-404-221-1855. Mr. Gohil, thank you very much for joining us. How strong do you think the cells and the networks of terrorists are around the globe?
I think one of the most important issues that has come out of this awful tragedy is the appreciation and realization that there is a network. It's just not enough to bomb one or two camps in Afghanistan or dismantle the camps and the madrasas, the religious schools in Pakistan. There is an international network that stretches out to Western Europe and to the USA through affiliate companies, through cultural organizations, for the recruitment of both funds and personnel.
Well, as you probably have heard, the president has said that there will be no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them. Our Tom Mintier was just reporting from Pakistan that perhaps Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are two of the most important countries to get on board for support. Where do you think most of the terrorists are, and who's important to get on board?
The brain center for the terrorism is undoubtedly in Afghanistan, and the recruitment is done through some of the madrasas. These are the religious schools, and there are several thousand of these in Pakistan. The terrorist groups at one time in the 60s and 70s, were based in the Middle East, but during the 80s, the shift has been towards Central and South Asia. The training, the brain center is in Afghanistan, but the reach is all over the world. The bombings in Africa, the attack on USS Cole, is an indication of the kind of reach that these groups have. And one is dealing here not just with one group, one is dealing here with dozens of groups with different leaderships. There isn't any one single leader. It's quite a big problem, this.
Well, and as you say, worldwide reach, because as one of the diplomats was quoted on a story today that I saw, never dreamed, or words to the effect, never dreamed that a terror attack like this could happen in the United States. Let's go to a caller for you. Tracy from Pennsylvania. Tracy?
Hi.
Go right ahead.
How are you?
Good. Go right ahead.
I was calling from Philadelphia. Our schools were closed Wednesday here, and I was glad to have them. I was home with my son, by ourselves, just trying to explain to him what was going on. He just thought it was an accident. Mommy, what's this accident? You know.
How old is your son, Tracy?
He just turned 11 in July.
And was he worried?
Oh, at first, no, because he thought it was an accident. You know, Mommy, what's this accident? Mommy, what's this accident?
What did you explain to him? Well, how did you explain terrorism?
It's very, very hard. You can't explain terrorism to a child. Terrorism to an adult, we understand. We've seen Beirut, Lebanon. We've seen what goes on in Iraq and Iran. But my child doesn't know anything about that, you know, and I'm trying to explain to him that some people were mad. They were angry. They don't like how we run our government or how our government has influence on their countries. And he's still like, well, what? What are you talking about? He doesn't get it, you know?
What about that, Mr. Gohel? How do you explain that to a child or to an adult? How do you explain the mindset of a terrorist or of terrorism?
This is, I mean, how on earth would you explain what's happened even to an adult? I still am trying to reconcile myself with the horrific pictures that I've seen since Tuesday. To put the whole issue in perspective, America has been through 2 world wars, but did not suffer any attack on its mainland. And when Japan, the entire Japanese Air Force, attacked Pearl Harbor on the Day of Infamy, some 2,000 people were killed. Now here, on a normal day, without any declaration of war, without the use of any kind of Air Force jets, at least over 5,000 people have died. The only way to understand this is to accept that you're dealing here with a group of people whose loyalty is to an ideology and not to any country. There is nothing tangible here. You can't negotiate with them because there's nothing you can offer them. It's not a territorial dispute. It's not localized. It's a battle of ideologies, a battle between a group of people who believe in a very fundamentalist lifestyle and who see the free world, the democratic world, and America as a leader of that free world to be the enemy. It's a battle of ideologies.
Let's bring in one of our international correspondents who's been in war zones before. Alessio Vinci is joining us, and he is in New York. Alessio.
Well, yes, I am in New York, and I would have never thought of covering a war zone-like situation in the middle of Manhattan. It's really a situation that you heard in the last hour or so, everybody talking about the war, about whether there should be retaliation, whether it should be strong or whether it should be measured. And it's quite incredible walking here in downtown Manhattan, and at least in the area that has been sealed off by the police and by the army. Walking around earlier this morning, for example, I was going along an empty street and I saw a column of military Humvees driving by me, and I certainly at that moment felt that I was back in Bosnia or in Kosovo or in Chechnya, and it was quite incredible thinking that at that moment I was on Canal Street in the middle of Manhattan. And as I'm speaking to you now, I'm hearing helicopters hovering overhead. At times there is a military jet patrolling the skies. Certainly all situations that we have been experiencing far away from the United States, namely in Kosovo or in Macedonia recently or in Yugoslavia. It's quite an incredible situation to be here in the middle of Manhattan covering a situation that looks very much like a war zone.
Alessio, I don't know if you had time to talk with people where you were. I don't know if you were in Rome or where you were before you came to New York, because you're based, I think, now in Rome, but you've been certainly in Yugoslavia and in Bosnia. Did you have a chance to talk to people in Europe to ask them how they felt about an attack that happened on U.S. soil?
Yes, I have, and there are two things that often come up. The first one is the fact that everybody recognizes in Europe that this is the first time, as one of our callers, I believe, was reminding us, that the first time that the Americans are suffering an attack on their mainland. And a lot of the people, especially, I must say, some of the friends and the people that I know in Yugoslavia, are telling me, well, now the Americans too know what it means to suffer and to have victims. Of course, this attack is of a completely different nature, and the sheer number of people who are believed to be dead, 5,000, I mean, we haven't had that number of civilian casualties throughout the entire Yugoslavia, NATO bombing campaign on Yugoslavia, so certainly you cannot compare the two things, but a lot of the people overseas are telling me that perhaps the Americans will start feeling a little bit about what it means to be the victims of such an attack. But mainly what everybody's telling me is that, you know, asking me, how are the Americans feeling, how are they coping with this? And one thing I was noticing today when President George Bush arrived here to see all those firefighters chanting USA, 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 I would have never really believed that something like this could have happened so spontaneously. Again, covering many wars in the Balkans, how many times I've seen hardline nationalist Serbs chanting Serbia, 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 and I thought that was something perhaps a little bit negative, but in this case, to see this group of firefighters and rescue workers chanting USA, USA, and again, in the middle of Manhattan, I mean, I must stress this fact, and I don't know how many times I can really say it, to be here in the heart of New York and to look at what's happening behind me, huge cranes, 2 collapsed buildings, 2 planes that collapse into it, it's just incredible. I myself cannot believe it.
Are there some people, Alessio, who does it make them more fearful that a terrorist attack could happen to them, and what could happen now on international soil as well?
Well, you know, in Europe, especially in the 70s, and there has been a lot of terrorist attacks in Germany, in Italy. So certainly
right,
people,
the airports.
Yes, and the airport in Italy, of course. So terrorism has struck Italy and Germany, and to some extent France, and you know, every day in the news today. Take, for example, the bombing, what's happening in Macedonia or in Northern Ireland or in Corsica. I mean, there are many, or in the Basque region. I mean, there are many areas in Europe today where not this kind of attack, again, this is possibly the largest terrorist attack, I think, in history. I cannot imagine where one single attack has killed so many people. So certainly the Europeans are a little more familiar with what terrorism means. Whether they're more fearful, I don't think so, because, you know, in this kind of situation, usually the level of security increases and then the likelihood of a new attack decreases. But certainly they are watching a lot more carefully about perhaps where to stay, and especially in the areas where there is high risk of more attacks, namely the airport, for example.
Mm-hmm. And we're looking at a live picture of the Pentagon as we continue to visit here this evening. Tom in New Mexico is on the phone with us. Tom? Hi, Tom. Would you go ahead, please? Are you there?
No.
No, I think we've lost Tom. I'm sorry. Brian in Chicago, would you go ahead, please?
I just wanted to say that I'm completely behind President Bush's campaign to approve the $10 billion for the airlines and improving security, as far as fortifying the doors, putting marshals on planes, and restricting passengers from ticket-only places to kind of cut down on the traffic for the, you know, the security guards, so they can do a better job to prevent this from happening.
And no curbside check-in. That's one of the other new rules.
Yeah, I didn't completely understand the rationale for that, because I don't think they're matching up passengers with the baggage.
Well, I think that what they're trying to do is keep the baggage with the people and make sure that they're matching up. But they used to do that, I thought, at curbside too, when you mentioned that. But that's one of the new rules that they want in effect, and so that's one of the new ones that they'll do for security. Mr. Gohel, to get back into you, and we talk about some of these extra measures that are being talked about for security at airports. What do you think needs to be done? What steps need to be taken to help root out terrorists?
Firstly, I think there has to be an international response to this. This is a menace that the entire world is facing. America has suffered great losses on Tuesday, but terrorism has been there in South and Central Asia since about 1989. And the irony is that a terrorist can only operate freely in a democratic society. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it made the borders a lot more easy to cross, and terrorists are now able to move around freely. They're able to, a policeman, for instance, cannot stop someone unless he has a warrant or he has reasons for suspicion. And there are so many buildings around the world, there's so many people all over the world. How does one protect every single individual? But some steps can be taken as far as airlines are concerned. One thing that could be done, it may be difficult to do, is to prevent any kind of access from the passenger area into the cockpit area, even if this means creating a separate entry and exit for the cockpit crew, so that there is no way an aeroplane can ever be used as a missile, as it was done. Other than that, it's a question of rooting out the terrorist network. It's a question of pursuing these people wherever they are and eliminating and eradicating the training camps, the infrastructure, and the leadership. And for this, the entire international community will have